Once again to this evening of celebrating, in a sense, the inner life. It's something of a contradiction to celebrate something that is so inward, but it does affirm the power of the inwardness of what Shiva represents. What Paramhansa Yogananda brought, what Mahavatar Babaji brought, is a very unusual combination and almost a marriage, in a sense, of the qualities of the yogi, Shiva, withdrawing his life force deep into the spine in deep meditation, but combined with Krishna, who is in the world in action, serving, giving, kindness, compassion. And these two qualities or two approaches are usually considered separately by most people. But for those of us, we're in a way devotee yogis, combining yoga, meditation, this stern withdrawal that Shiva represents and offers, combined with kindness, compassion, divine love that Krishna represents. I'll get into that a little bit more later on. But first I'm going to tell a story of Lord Shiva. Like many stories are told about Shiva, Brahma, Vishnu, very often they get a little unbalanced in their ways, and so they need a corrective. And this is one of these stories of Shiva. And the story is told that one day Indra, Lord Indra, who seems to be involved in a lot of troublesome events in those days, he was in a dispute, as he often seemed to be, with some farmers this time. And so he cursed the farmers, and he cursed them that they would not have rain for 12 years. And this was a serious curse because this was almost a death sentence for these farmers. And they pled with him for compassion. And Indra finally said, okay, it will not rain for 12 years or until Lord Shiva plays his damru. Is that how you pronounce it, damru? Which is his hand drum. It says, when Lord Shiva plays his hand drum, his damru, then it will rain. Otherwise, it will be 12 years. And so they got excited and they went running to Lord Shiva to get him to play his damru. Indra got there ahead of time and said, Lord Shiva, as a favor to me, I'm asking you to not play your damru for 12 years. This is Indra at his finest, doing this sort of thing. And so Shiva gave his word. And so it did not rain year after year. The farmers, they all gave up right away. They just sat home, moped around the house, didn't do anything, because why do anything when it wasn't going to rain? But there was one farmer. Every day he would go out. He planted his seeds, tilled the soil, pulled the weeds, put up the fence, prepared the crops. He did that the first year. He did it the second year. He did it the third year. And no rain, no crops. And finally the farmers went up to this man and said, you're such a fool. Why are you doing this? There's no rain for 12 years. And this farmer said, well, I'm afraid that if I don't keep practicing planting and growing crops, that if I do nothing for 12 years, I'll forget how to be a farmer and how to grow crops. And so I have to keep practicing. And Parvati happened to be walking by, and she saw this man, and her heart went out to him. And she was always the balance of compassion that would sometimes balance Shiva's more stern approach to life. And so she went to Lord Shiva. She heard the story of him having to play his damru. And she went to him and said, Lord, this poor man here, we have to have compassion on him. He's going out every day for 3 years, planting his crops. All of them will probably die if you don't play your damru soon. You must do it right away. And Shiva said, no, I gave my word to Indra, and this guy, he's saying that he'll forget how to plant his crops, and maybe he will, and so that's their problem if they forget. And Parvati, who also had the deep wisdom that only comes from compassion, she got a twinkle in her eye and in her mind, and she said, well, Lord, if you don't play your damru for 12 years, I bet you'll forget how to play it when the 12 years comes up. And women can almost always outsmart men, and this is a good example of this. And so Shiva just looked at her and said, you foolish woman, I'm the Lord, I cannot forget how to play my damru. Go away. And so she went away to cook a meal, his favorite meal of rice with some ashes thrown into it. And she went away, and he went off by himself. But there was a seed of doubt planted in his mind. And he started thinking, well, what if I do forget to play my damru after 12 years? I mean, it's probably not going to happen, but what if? And so he was a little embarrassed. And so he was watching Parvati, and she went off to collect the ashes for his food, and so he went and picked up his favorite damru, and it was covered with dust, and he had to blow the dust off, and he had these all of a sudden fond memories of this drum he used to play so much. And he looked at the drum, and he thought, well, I can't forget how to play the damru, but what if maybe the damru forgets how to be played from not being used for all these 12 years? And so the seed of doubt started getting to him, but he was too proud to admit. And so he picked up the damru, and in his hand, it just felt so nice. It just brought back all these fond memories of playing his drum and destroying worlds and universes with the sound of his drum. And so he thought, okay, I'll just play it really quietly, just to see, make sure that I've remembered how to do it. And so he just did tick, 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 and just played a very silent noise. And just, again, all these memories came back of playing his drum and destroying universes and all. And he started playing it a little bit more loudly. And then he all of a sudden realized, oh no, what if Parvati hears me playing? She'll think I'm a fool. And so he stopped and he said, okay, I know how to play this still. But it was too late, because when the Lord plays his drum, even quietly, this is the power of Om, and it reverberates throughout the whole universe. And so the people on earth, they heard this sound of Om, and they looked up in the heavens, and they heard the boom, boom of the Lord's drum. And the farmers also heard this, and they got a little bit excited. And the problem was they didn't plant any crops, so they had no seeds in the soil. But the farmer who did plant, he also heard the sound. And for him, it also came not just as the sound of Om, but the sound of thunder, because a storm was approaching, and it was starting to rain. And his crops all got watered, and the seeds all came up that he planted. And not just the seeds that he planted that year, but the seeds that he planted the year before, and the seeds he planted the year before that. And they all came up. 3 years worth of crops and seed all came up, and he had the biggest harvest that he had ever had. And so there's many lessons to learn from this story. One is that if one just practices yoga and meditation without compassion, kindness, it turns into a degree of insensitivity and withdrawal that is unbalanced. And this is the balance of Parvati and Shiva, also of Krishna and Shiva, and what our gurus gave us, and I'll talk about this. But there's also another meaning to it, which is that this farmer, he continued to practice, no matter what the results were, because that's what he did. He practiced planting seeds, and he knew how to do nothing else. But he also knew that somehow he knew that he must keep doing it year after year, no matter the results. And he was a true yogi in a way, because the yogi does not look for results. If the Lord of the universe came to us and said, okay, you can practice meditation, but you're not going to get results for 12 years, what would we do? That's an interesting question to ask ourselves. Another way to look at it is, what if the Lord came and said, you're not going to be liberated for another 12 lifetimes? Now, one person might respond to this by saying, I'll be liberated in 12 lifetimes, so what do I have to, I don't need to do anything. I'll enjoy these next 12 lifetimes. And what would happen to him? Well, it's likely that after 12 lifetimes, the Lord would come, and the man would say, okay, I'm ready to be freed. And the Lord would say, there's a problem here, which is that when I said you would be liberated in 12 lifetimes, it was based on what you were doing and practicing already. And you stopped practicing. And now, because you stopped practicing, not only will be another 12 lifetimes, but you created a lot more karma in the meantime. It's going to be 24 lifetimes. What about that yogi who meditates, continues meditating, and the Lord comes and says, it will be 12 lifetimes? There is a story of this, in fact. It was disciples of the great saint Chaitanya, I think it was. And I think it was Chaitanya or Adi Shankara. It was Chaitanya. And his disciples were coming to him, and they were asking him, he happened to tell one of them, you will be liberated in one lifetime. And they were all eager to hear for themselves. And another one came up, when will I be liberated? And he said 2 lifetimes, 3 lifetimes, but it was all very short amount of time. And his most advanced disciple, who everyone really highly respected, came to him, and he wasn't really interested because he just was not that self-involved. He was utterly selfless. That's how great of a soul he was. But the other disciples insisted, we want to know how many lifetimes it's going to be for this great soul and great saint who we so admire. And Chaitanya looked at him and he said, well, for you, it's going to be 100 lifetimes. And all of the other disciples just were crestfallen. It was like, oh no, this poor fellow, 100 lifetimes. And this saint, who had another 100 lifetimes, he suddenly just went outside, and they looked, and he was dancing. He was dancing with joy. He was clapping his hands. Tears of bliss were pouring down his face. And they all asked him, why are you dancing, and why are you in such joy? And he said, didn't you hear our master? He said, I'm going to find God. Period. Who cares how long it is? And in that moment, Chaitanya came out and said, you are already free. Through this utter degree of lack of selfishness and not asking when will God come, when will God come and free me, but I will do whatever I can. Practice yoga, practice meditation, kindness, seva, compassion, and the results inevitably come. And just like that farmer, if we do it in the right way, it doesn't have to take 12 years. It doesn't have to take 12 lifetimes. It can be in one lifetime. If we do it with that right attitude, and it's all about balancing, again, the yogi and the devotee. And this brings us to Mahavatar Babaji, because in a way, he encompasses both aspects of this. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda writes that Mahavatar Babaji, that some of his disciples gave him names that related to Lord Shiva, to avatars of Shiva. And yet, interestingly, the Hari Mahashaya said that Mahavatar Babaji was an incarnation of Lord Krishna. And so the implication is that these names of Shiva were not because he was an incarnation of Shiva, but because he represented the qualities of the yogi in the Himalayas, withdrawing his life force deep into himself. And it's interesting because in the place where Babaji lives, according to Yoganandaji, in the hills above Badrinath, it's very interesting because there is this temple there, and the murti there is really very unusual because it's Lord Badrinarayan, who is an incarnation of Vishnu. And yet it's a very rare, or maybe even unique murti, because it represents Vishnu not in his typical reclining mode of appreciating this creation, but as a yogi. And this murti, for those, I think some people here probably have seen that murti, it looks exactly like this image of Mahavatar Babaji. And so it's so unusual that there's an incarnation of Vishnu Krishna who is also a yogi, and it brings these two together. I have a photo of the actual murti from a very, very old, rare book on my phone, if anyone wants to see it after the satsang, because it's very striking that Babaji is both yogi, a saint, a representation of this complete withdrawal of the life force, but also representing Lord Krishna and the incarnation of Lord Krishna, where we all must live in this world. And rather than seeing the world as delusion, we see God in the world. And so, yes, we withdraw at times into ourselves to recharge, but then when we go out and act, we practice karma yoga, nishkam karma, kindness, compassion. And we see God in all creatures, and this is the way of Lord Krishna. in the Bhagavad Gita. And so this is the combination. And we've seen, I think, I've seen this, and I know Swami Kriyanandaji has written about this, seeing yogis over the years, including Ananda yogis, who only meditated and did not serve and did not have this deep devotion, and they became proud. And this is why these stories, I think, are told of Shiva and the others who get a little bit proud of themselves because of their powers or because they're great yogis, because again it requires this balance. So I think what we'll do now is we will do an arati, but before the arati we'll do some chanting of Maha Mrityunjaya mantra. And Maha Mrityunjaya mantra, again, it shows the combination of these two qualities. Later on at the all-night meditation, I think they'll chant it 108 times, but I think we'll chant it 24 times, since not all of us here will attend the all-night meditation. And this mantra is interesting in a certain way, because we think of mantras sometimes as just these mechanical things. There's this emphasis on getting the pronunciation exactly right, and if you do it mechanically right, then you get the results. But this mantra sort of tells another story when you read it and understand it, because the whole first half, and I think everyone maybe knows this, but the whole first half of Maha Mrityunjaya is an invocation to the Lord as Shiva, Triambakam, the three-eyed one. And it's devotional. We invoke the three-eyed one, Lord Shiva, who we adore and worship, who is most fragrant and all-giving. And it's purely an act of devotional offering, inviting the Lord. And then it also invokes the power of Om, the power of the Lord, to free us from limitation, to free us from karma. And of course, as we know, the second half of that mantra, we ask Shiva, free us from the bondage of karma. And just as the gardener or the farmer severs the cucumber from the vine, and those seeds are severed from the vine, please also sever the seeds of karma of ours, that they no longer are attached to us, and that they no longer bind us. And the mantra does have the power when we invoke God's presence, when we evoke the power of Om, when we practice meditation, Kriya Yoga, to very quickly dissolve those seeds of karma. And it's a very inward mantra, so let's practice it in this inward way, more tuning into the energy in the spine. We'll listen to Swami Kriyanandaji chanting it, and so we'll use his particular inflection and rhythm as we chant it to also draw on Swamiji's energy in a way.